In this episode, we spoke with San Francisco-based lawyer, regulatory expert, and former president of the California Public Utility Commission, Loretta Lynch. We also hear from solar user Richard Lass, who shares his story about how his rooftop solar saved his life. And of course, we give you all the latest on AB 942, the bill that would break 2 million rooftop solar contracts. Ready? Set.
Welcome to Solar Freedom, your frontline resource for defending the freedom and independence of rooftop solar. I'm Dave Rosenfeld, Executive Director of the Solar Rights Alliance.
And I'm Cailey Underhill, Advocacy and Development Director of the Solar Rights Alliance, where we bring you the tools to put the power back in your hands.
All right, let's get right into it. Cailey, what is the latest in rooftop solar?
Well, a few weeks ago, AB 942, the big bill that would break 2 million rooftop solar contracts, passed through the California State Assembly. Want to be clear right off the bat? This does not mean it has become law. The bill still has to pass through a series of obstacles for it to become a law in California. What happens now is that it heads to the California State Senate, where there are more opportunities to kill this terrible bill.
Right. Yeah, the bill is not law. We have an opportunity to stop this bill before it becomes law. What would happen if AB 942 became the law?
So when rooftop solar users in California go solar, they sign a contract, which is called the Interconnection Agreement. It is this document right here, and it guarantees that rooftop solar users in California get to have their systems stay on the solar program in California for 20 years. And that program is called the net metering program. So that system stays on the net metering program for 20 years, even if the home is sold. That is explicitly outlined in the terms and conditions of this contract. And the contract literally says, this is a legally binding contract. Those words in black and white. And what this bill would do would break all of those contracts whenever a home is sold. And what that means is that people who got a loan or a lease to go solar who then try to sell their home, they'll have to pay off that whole loan or lease to sell their home, meaning they'll lose out on tens of thousands of dollars because those loans and leases would become immediately underwater when the home is sold. So two terrible impacts.
Yeah, that's terrible. And the bill was a squeaker, as you said, right? Like it got through the assembly just by a couple of votes.
In California, in order for a bill to pass through the state assembly, it needs 41 votes on the assembly floor. This bill got 46 votes. That is a slim margin. And in California, it's a kind of a quirk of California politics. There's two ways for a legislator to deny the bill a vote it needs to pass. They can vote no. This is a normal thing we've heard in all the states, right? They can just vote no against a bill. But they have another option, which is called NVR. It means no vote recorded. And it is a way for a legislator to basically just kind of put their hands up and say, yeah, I'm gonna lay off this bill. I'm just not gonna cast a vote. I'm just not gonna. I'm not gonna get involved in this. And what it means is it denies the bill a vote it needed to get to that 41 number. So it is a good thing. So legislators out there, assembly members who voted no or who went NVR, thank you for acting to protect rooftop solar contracts across the state of California. If your legislator is one of those legislators, please thank them. That means they really stood up to massive monopoly utility pressure for you. So they stood up to the utilities in order to have your back, protect your rooftop solar contract. That's a big deal. And legislators are more likely to do that again if they hear from their constituents that they did the right thing. So please act now. We've got that list right up on the screen. We'll have it in the show notes so that everybody knows which legislators voted to protect their solar contracts. And again, it is a big deal that this passed with such a slim margin, a direct result of your efforts, and now it heads to the Senate, which is a different ballgame. So now we have a completely different set of legislators, and it's time to make sure that we take the momentum that we've all been building in the Assembly and move it over to the Senate to stop this bill before it does become law.
You know, I did some analysis on the Assembly vote, and there is a almost complete correlation between the number of phone calls that a legislator got and the number of just like really solid interactions that legislators had with their constituents, either in person or on a Zoom call or in a meeting in Sacramento. There's a direct correlation between that and whether the legislator voted to break your solar contract or whether they voted to protect your solar contract. And so I don't think this is very complicated. The more that a legislator hears relentlessly from their constituents through phone calls and through interactions, literal lobbying interactions, the more likely they are to tell the utilities, I can't be with you this time. I gotta stick with my district. And so that, I think, is how we defeat this in the Senate, is we have to just keep turning up the heat. And I don't think it's any more than that. The utilities can shower lawmakers with gobs and gobs of money and surround them with like gobs and gobs of lobbyists. But ultimately, you're the one who gives them their job, and you're the one that can take away their job. And if enough of you call, then that's a part of the equation. So I don't think it's very complicated at all.
I think that's exactly right, Dave. And that is really reflected in what happened here with the assembly. And one thing we heard from a lot of assembly members who voted to protect solar contracts is that they'd gotten more calls on this bill than on any other issues by many, many, many times. And part of the result of that is that because those calls had happened because people were posting on social media, then when there were also protests and rallies in the state capitol, it attracted the mainstream media too. So it had the impact of actually getting news cameras there as well, because that's how these things build. So there was a recent lobby meeting session and protest, kind of a double whammy, that happened in the state capitol in Sacramento just a couple of weeks ago. And CBS was there, and they captured all the action, and they also interviewed you and another rooftop solar user. And let's play that clip so folks can see the impact of their actions through the mainstream media, which then reaches millions more people across the whole state of California.
Look at our state capitol tonight, now quiet after a protest on the steps that happened today. Furious Bay Area residents found themselves in Sacramento to fight back against a plan to change the rules for homeowners with solar power. John Ramos has more on why they say they feel betrayed.
The California legislature created the demand for rooftop solar 30 years ago, so they probably shouldn't be surprised that there's opposition now that they're talking about taking some of it away. The sun is the source of heat for the planet, and that's especially true in Sacramento these days.
No! AB 942! No! AB 942!
The solar industry and system owners have not been shy about expressing their views about Assembly Bill 942. The bill is authored by Southern California Assembly member Lisa Calderon, who says the 20-year solar incentives created by the legislature no longer work.
Well, they're lying. There's a dozen economists that have completely debunked that claim that somehow solar customers are to blame for high rates.
Dave Rosenfeld heads up the Solar Rights Alliance. They say what's being ignored is all the energy that rooftop solar is providing that the big utilities do not have to pay to create. And they're mad as hell that the state is considering breaking a contract with solar owners.
It refers to the 20-year terms as a guarantee. That's the CPUC's own words. So in every way, for all of this time, the state has been representing this as a contract, as a legal agreement, something that is very, very serious. And people made long-term financial decisions believing the state at its word that it was a guarantee, that it was a contract.
AB 942 initially proposed to cut the 20-year term to 10 years, but the outcry was such that that was removed. Now the argument is over what happens if someone with a favorable contract sells their home. The current rules say the new owner inherits the previous solar agreement. Under 942, they would get a much lower rate for their energy. Kathy Schiffer considers that a betrayal.
And I do want to sell my house in the future, and so this was going to be an addition to my house. It would make it more attractive, and now it won't be that. To me, the whole thing has just kind of fallen apart. The reason to get solar, the financial reason to get solar.
Even under the new proposed rules, a solar power system would still be a better deal than no solar at all. The question is how long it would take for the system to pay for itself and how attractive it may be to buyers when it comes time to sell the home.
Dave, I love how in that clip you just stare down the camera and call it like it is. The utilities are lying about rooftop solar, scapegoating average, everyday Californians who just
Yeah.
did the right thing and invested their own money in their rooftop solar panels. And now the utilities are pointing the finger at those people, at those consumers, at those constituents to say it's your fault that rates are rising when really it's increased utility spending that is causing rates to rise. And AB 942 is just their latest attempt to shift attention away from what's really causing rates to rise. And our expert here today with us is the perfect person to talk to us about how this came to be and what we can do about it.
We're very excited to have Loretta Lynch as our next guest on the podcast. Loretta Lynch is a San Francisco-based regulatory lawyer and energy expert who is the former president of the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC. Since her time at the CPUC, Loretta has been a tireless champion for a cheaper and a cleaner grid that works for the consumer, not just the utilities. Loretta, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
We're really glad to have you. And so let's just jump right into it. As the first question, can you just explain to our listeners why you think electricity prices are so high in California?
Sure. It's an abject failure of the regulator to actually do their job and regulate the way the law requires them to do. So instead of the regulator taking a sharp pencil to the utilities' claimed costs, they actually rubber stamp those costs without even looking at them. In the last couple of years, the California PUC has started to basically give the utilities everything they want without any evidentiary hearings, without discovery, without making the utilities prove their actual costs. And they do that through what they call interim rate increases. So the utilities ask for money, and the PUC, as the regulator, gives them the money and says, we'll look at the documents later. And the problem is later often does not come. So what happens is the utilities overclaim, overestimate, and overspend, and therefore overprofit. And so it's not a surprise that our rates are through the roof, that California families' rates are second highest in the nation. And also, when you allow the utilities to buy everything they ask for, it's like a kid in the candy store. So instead of the PUC doing what they're supposed to do, which is require comparisons between options and then choose the most effective option to provide safe and reliable service, the PUC just lets the utilities decide. And guess what? They always decide the most expensive option, or they take all the candy in the candy store and say, we want it all. And no other state does it this way, which is why our rates are outrageously high.
Right. I mean, the evidence is all around us in the form of the rates that Californians have to pay. Do you have any examples of these inflated forecasts and projections and spending proposals that the utilities have put forward recently?
Oh boy, how much time do you have, Dave? So sure. One place is in wildfire mitigation. After the utilities' negligence have caused devastating wildfires that have cost the state and our people and businesses tens of billions of dollars in damage. Finally, the legislature acted and said, hey, PUC, you guys need to require the utilities to prevent wildfires, imagine that, and maintain their systems. So, of course, the utilities cooked up the most expensive way to maintain their system or to add new safeguards to their systems, and only in a way that's going to provide them the absolute most profit. So, you probably heard about undergrounding lines. So to underground a line, PG&E estimates it costs between $4 and $6 million a mile. But to just cover the conductor where the wire meets the pole costs about $300,000 to $400,000, or 10 times less. But the utilities make a 10% roughly profit on all of their physical assets, on all their infrastructure. So if they asked for a covered conductor at $300,000, then they're going to make 10% profit off of that, or $30,000. But if you ask for a mile of undergrounding at $3 to $6 million, then you're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit for each and every mile. So guess what they asked for? They asked to underground 1,500 miles of wire. Now, we don't know if all those wires need to be undergrounded, but not surprisingly, the PUC allowed PG&E to go ahead and start charging you and me to underground over 1,300 miles of those transmission lines. The problem is PG&E's not doing it. They've only undergrounded a couple hundred. Yet they are collecting money in our bills as if they're undergrounding over 1,000. And that money becomes a slush fund that PG&E can use however it wants. And that's just one of a myriad long list of examples of how they overestimate, underspend, but take the money and run anyway.
Wow, that is.
Wow.
I know,
bonkers
surprising,
when you put
isn't
like
it?
that. And Loretta, I don't know whether or not this is something you can answer based on this particular example, but one thing we were talking about last week with Jamie Court, the president of Consumer Watchdog, is that more often than not, the utilities take this money, which they're taking from us, the ratepayers, and then they use it to lobby our elected officials.
Oh,
Is
they
that
sure
part of
do.
what's happening
They
here too? Like, is that part of this whole machine that they're building?
Absolutely. They don't only lobby our elected officials, they lobby the regulators. So when I was appointed to the commission, all of a sudden, people I knew in my past who I hadn't seen for years, college classmates, law school classmates, people I'd worked on political campaigns on, called me up to say, hey, guess what? Guess who just hired me to talk to you? Literally, I had over 15 people hired just to lobby me who I
Wow.
knew. And that happens with each and every commissioner, each and every department head, probably all the way down to the guy who's right out of college, supposedly checking some numbers or at least rubber stamping the increases. Because it's not their money. It's our money. And as long as
Right.
the PUC allows them to spend as much of our money as they want, they will. And so basically, we are paying so that PG&E can hire people to lobby against our interests and to take more money from us. And we are paying through the nose at every level of government and regulation. And of course, they have, let's just say, robust press operations as well. And that's
Yes.
who's paying for that? We are.
We
All
are.
those really fun commercials where everybody's wearing hard hats and they're doing their best to keep California safe. You've probably seen those commercials from PG&E, Edison, and SDG&E. Guess who pays for those? We do. And how much do those cost? Hundreds of millions of dollars a year. A year, all
In our money, with
In
our
of
our
money.
our
money.
money to tell us that we need to give them more money so they can make more profit. And that just has to stop.
So let me just make sure I've got this right. So you've got utilities who are charging us like absolutely through the nose for electricity, the same electricity that people get lots of other places for significantly less. Their spending has gone up 300% over the past 20 years, even though peak electricity demand has been absolutely flat, which is then ballooning their profits, careening our rates skyward. And the regulators are doing nothing because the utilities are hiring people to lobby both the regulators and the legislators, and by our count have spent over $1 billion in campaign contributions to sitting legislators, academics, nonprofits, businesses. Do I have that right? Is that about the size of it, Loretta?
Well, I would just correct one piece of that, which is it's not that the regulators are doing nothing, they're actively complicit. They are
I see.
enabling this overspending, this profligate spending, and this unconscionable spending by not doing their job. Their
Right.
job is to keep costs just and reasonable. It is not reasonable to have so many lobbyists lobbying the regulator.
So another dimension of this, we've talked now about the regulators and we've talked about how the utilities themselves hire gobs and gobs of lobbyists and everyone else to try to surround the regulators and the politicians. We've observed also that they don't even stop there, though, that there's a cast of characters in the Malay who represent themselves as independent voices who are basically allied with the utilities and validate the work that they're doing, but make it seem like it's independent And I don't know if you want to name names or not, Loretta, but like, can you talk a little bit about the kind of supporting cast that helps the utilities do their business?
Well, first, I would say working at the PUC is a special level of Dante's hell. Number one, just because, meaning trying to get a consumer or an environmental perspective listened to whatsoever, because the regulator is so captured. And so I do want to acknowledge that folks who become a party at the PUC to present a consumer or a community or an environmental perspective already has the deck stacked against them. The problem is there is such a crushing pressure at the PUC to go along and get along that most groups eventually do. And if you don't go along and get along, the PUC has many mechanisms at their disposal to make sure that you're shut out, not heard, and certainly not paid for your participation. That said, several groups make millions of dollars every year in what's called intervenor compensation, which is a system somewhat like attorney's fees for participating in regulatory cases at the PUC and winning something, sort of, and then getting their fees paid. And that keeps them going. And several of those groups, most all, if not all, of the money that they use to participate at the PUC and to keep their groups going come from this attorney's fees like process. Now, granted, the powers that be at the PUC are pushing them to go along and get along. And unfortunately, several of them happily comply. And I'll just tell you one of the many stories I could tell you about one of those groups. And that group is the Natural Resources Defense Council, or the NRDC. And NRDC nationwide does a lot of really good stuff. But in California, the California Energy Program, from my personal experience as the president of the PUC, is a green washer for the utilities. And I'll tell you how. I worked on a case to close the last coal slurry plant in the United States that was providing coal-fired power into Los Angeles. It was called the Mojave plant, and the plant was located in Nevada, in that little corner of Nevada where California and Arizona come in. And it used water to transport coal into the plant. Pristine water from the Navajo and Hopi reservations from the desert. So they're overpumping a ground aquifer and taking water for an industrial purpose that, the people of that area desperately needed. But we're going through an evidentiary process where we are gathering the facts. And Southern California Edison filed briefs that said, yeah, we still need the power, we still want the power, let us keep the power plant going. As did NRDC. And when I sat down to read the briefs in the case, I first read the Southern California Edison brief, and then I picked up the NRDC brief, and I'm like, wow, this seems awfully similar. So then I put them side by side, and I flipped the pages, and those briefs were the same. Aside from, instead of saying Southern California Edison recommends, it would say NRDC recommends. The same brief. So I called in the lead lawyer for NRDC and said, hey, I want to talk to you about this case. And he was more than happy to talk to me because he wanted to push his perspective. And I said, look, here's their brief, here's your brief. Who wrote it? And he got up and he walked out because there was nothing to say. Page by page, for 55 pages, it was the same argument. And when you have a leading environmental group so connected to a utility that they would file the same brief, and pretend that they were separate parties, that's when you have a complete breakdown of the adversary system. And I believe that that continues to this day. Maybe not page by page, maybe they've gotten a little smarter, but argument by argument and coordination by coordination and greenwashing by greenwashing, it remains the same. Not for all the groups, but certainly for that particular group. Although I want to say there are some very courageous groups that don't go along and consistently get denied and docked, but they are setting a record for history and they are exposing where the PUC Commission itself goes along to get along with utilities. And they are exposing the lack of facts that are behind many of the PUC decisions, which just throw our money at the utilities without ensuring that the costs that we are paying for are just and reasonable.
So then maybe that's a good place to turn to like the future solutions. And, we have lots of ideas about how this system could be better and cheaper and cleaner and work better for everyday people. I know that you have ideas. Can you describe a little bit of like, if we could actually turn the ship around, if we could get cleaner politicians in that appoint cleaner commissioners, or we have a better system even that's better than the commission, what what would be the vision? How should California's electricity system work in your view?
Well, ultimately, just as we need to get the money out of politics, we need to get the money out of utilities. And that means public utilities, not private. Each and every state in the country has public utilities. Los Angeles DWP, SMUD, Palo Alto, Hillsburg, Pasadena, Glendale. There are public utilities all throughout California, and they provide electricity much more cheaply, more and more cleanly, and also absolutely without a doubt more reliably. Why? Because they are not pursuing profits. That means they spend the money to maintain their system so that the system doesn't break because of negligent maintenance, and they don't have to build new. But the private utilities love to build new because they make more profits the more they build. So they make a 10% profit off of everything, right? So 10 cents of every dollar. But that's income to them. And they have to pay income taxes. But who pays their income taxes? We do. So a dollar, 10 cents of every dollar basically incurs income taxes somewhere between another 5 to 8%. So it's not just that we're paying 10% in profit, we're paying the taxes as well.
I mean, you've described how a better system would be one that's public, where this profit motive gets taken out of a lot of the decision making, and that makes a lot of sense. But another thing that you're pointing out here is that we could we could endlessly come up with a better way to have the CPUC work or something like that. But the bottom line is this is being driven by politics. The commissioners are appointed by the governor and then approved by the legislature. And these are elected officials who could choose to appoint different kinds of people and enforce the rules in a different kind of way. And so this gets back to your point of like, it's the money in the political system that's part of the problem, but it's also the voters themselves need to do more to hold these elected officials accountable for this kind of thing as well. And thus far, that has not really been what's happened in recent elections. I wonder what would happen. I'm just wondering out loud if voters really got focused on this and decided that the behavior of politicians with respect to the CPUC and these decisions became a salient issue that they were voting on in the next couple of elections. This seems like it's really time for a voter revolt. And
absolutely. Past time.
Right? Past time. I mean, a California style voter revolt that's laser focused on some very simple questions about what will you do when elected? And then we hold them accountable to that. And I certainly would love to see something like that evolve and be a part of that. So just staying on solutions for a little bit longer, what's your take on rooftop solar? The utilities call rooftop solar the bad guy. They claim that we're actually the problem. And obviously, our point of view is that rooftop solar should be a part of the solution, is one way that we can make electricity cheaper for everybody. But what's your take on this? You're an expert in this whole thing. You've had an inside view of how the electricity system works. What's the role of rooftop solar in making the system better for consumers?
Clean energy that's locally owned, that doesn't require super expensive long transmission lines to get it to the people, is the answer, not the problem. It is the answer to all of our problems because it's clean, it's cheaper, it is faster than waiting for the utilities to go build those monstrosities in the desert and take up desert land and water, and people can make their own choices. It really runs to the heart of our American democratic experience, which is you have the liberty to make your own choices about your own electric use. And I believe that we cannot, as Californians, meet our California values to clean up our air and our water and our entire system without rooftop solar. And not just rooftop solar for families, but rooftop solar for businesses, and rooftop solar on the post offices, and rooftop solar over every parking lot.
Loretta Lynch, thank you so much for being on the show. We had a great time with you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Now it's time for Solar Heroes, where we give a shout out to an awesome Solar Rights Alliance member. So, Dave, who is our solar hero for this episode?
So the solar hero for this episode is Rob. Rob attended the very first Solar Rights Alliance Lobby Day in 2018. He was literally like the first one to do something like that. And since then, Rob has been laser focused on building a personal relationship with his state assembly member. And he's done a great job at doing that. He's really focused on like that personal touch, getting to know the representative, showing up at events, getting to know and becoming really good at explaining the issues behind rooftop solar, figuring out what is resonating and being persuasive, what isn't. And as a result, he has ensured that his state representative is voting generally for standing up for rooftop solar consumers. It's really, really great. And we want to honor Rob for that.
Yeah, and he hasn't just stopped there. He's also done a number of things to help other people lobby their own elected official and be more effective in doing so. So, for example, he has made this awesome short animated video that people can send to their legislators after they meet with them as almost like a leave behind document, but in animated video format. It's brilliant. And in our most recent rally that happened in Sacramento, this is the one just a couple of weeks ago, Rob had the great idea to make a sign, which he made himself, was awesome, that really highlighted the fact that this contract is a legally binding contract. Those words, as we mentioned, is actually in the contract. And so he made this sign that blew those words out really, really big so that legislators who were walked by this sign.
Yeah, totally. So we really want to thank Rob for all of his efforts to promote the freedom and independence of rooftop solar to his representative and thinking very deeply about the best way to do that. We love working with Rob. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Rob.
And now we check in with our action team. Cailey, what's going on at the Solar Rights Alliance Action Center now that the amended version of AB 942 is in the Senate?
In order for AB 942 to become law, it will have to pass through 2 Senate committees and then a full Senate floor vote. So there is time and there are opportunities to stop this bill. Please go to Don't Break the Solar Contract Action. Solarrights.org. Don't break the solar contract action on the screen right now, in the show notes right now. Call your legislator, send a message to your legislator, even if you've done it already. It's now in the Senate, new ball game, new set of legislators. Please act again. Tell them to vote no on AB 942 as amended.
Yes, please do make that call to your state senator. And if they push back and tell you that AB 942 as amended solves the problem, you should push right back at them. AB 942 as amended still breaks a key provision in 2 million rooftop solar contracts. It still harms consumers if they try to sell their home. And this is why the California Association of Realtors, the state's Business and Industry Association, and some of the state's biggest home builders also oppose AB 942.
Folks, your actions have already made an impact. The key now is keeping up the momentum. We know what will happen if we do nothing. We have yet to see what will happen if we give it our all to stop this bill in the California State Senate. And it's important to take a moment to remember what we're fighting for, the right to make energy from the sun.
That's right. And it's time for Solar Voices, where we chat with a solar user in California about what rooftop solar means to them. We recently talked to Richard about how rooftop solar literally saved his life.
Richard, welcome onto the podcast. We're very excited to have you here today. We're starting a new segment called Solar Stories, where we just chat with solar users across the state of California about why they went solar and what they think about their solar system, and just sharing a little bit about their solar story. So I'd love to hear from you, Richard, about why you went solar and what solar means to you.
Well, about 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with a couple of forms of kidney disease. And we managed with my doctors and diet restrictions and medications to keep that at bay for about 15 years. But in late 2020, I had to start dialysis. But I had a friend who was a kidney doctor, and she told me about another method that I could do at home. But it was involved using a machine for the whole night while I slept. But if I lost power during the night, that would be a problem. I knew I wanted to do solar, and I knew I needed a battery so that I could guarantee I'd have power during the night in case power went out in my neighborhood. My machine wouldn't shut down and stop the dialysis process. So I had panels and a battery installed, and then that went very well. I never had any problems with the dialysis. And then in early 2021, one of my wonderful sister-in-laws donated a kidney to me. So I had a kidney transplant and was off dialysis. Very lucky to have that. I kept using the solar. So occasionally, I'll get a text from PG&E saying, we have a power outage in your area. And, I look out the window and yeah, the neighborhood's dark, but we still have power. So it's been very, very good for us. Right now, my system will put power back into the PG&E system most days. I also am part of Tesla's virtual power plant program, where when PG&E thinks they're going to get in trouble with peak alerts during the summer, they will draw power off of my battery to help keep, avoid blackouts and things like that. So it has worked out very well for me. I've been very happy.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And it sounds like it's worked out well for your community too. I mean, the fact that you're sharing energy back with the grid, back with your neighbors to try to keep the lights on, not just for you, but for your community is just incredible. And as I recall, when you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, you had also mentioned that you had a neighbor, is it, with a newborn?
Yeah, we had someone recently move in across the street from us, and they have a 7-month-old named Jack. And my wife made a point to go over and tell them that, we had solar power and we had batteries. So if they ever got in a situation during a power outage where they needed something for Jack, that involved power, they could come over to our house because we would be okay.
That is so sweet. That is so wonderful, Richard. And that exemplifies everything that I know about you as I've been getting to know you a little bit.
Yes.
That is just so, so delightful. All right. Well, thank you. I'm excited to start this new segment and just, see how people respond. So thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. We'd like to hear your story and we'd like to answer your questions. So if you have a rooftop solar story to share or a burning question about rooftop solar, please call 619-292-8740. Please state that you're calling for the podcast, include your name, your phone number, and your story or question. And in our upcoming episodes, we'll select stories to play on the air and we'll answer your questions too.
Thanks for joining us today.
And thank you for taking action to stop AB 942, the terrible bill that would break 2 million rooftop solar contracts across the state of California.
Thanks for tuning in to Solar Freedom, where we put the power back in your hands and give you the tools to defend the freedom and independence of rooftop solar. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, folks.